This happened last summer and started pretty much a year ago. I am a guy who spends quite a lot of time in front of my computer, and my room back at my parents' place has a window facing the road in front of the house. My computer is located next to the window, and when I'm sitting by it, I have that window to my right side. This means that if someone walks past the house, they can see me by the computer, and I often tend to look out the window whenever I see someone walking past in the corner of my eye. No big deal. So this all started when I noticed this woman, somewhere in her 20s, maybe early 30s, walking by quite often, as in 5 or 10 times every day. No big deal, of course. She probably just lives nearby, I thought, which I later found she did. This woman had a very uncomfortable look to her. It didn't look like she had showered in a while, and she had this extreme smile on her face, constantly, as if someone had stapled her face into that expression. I didn't think much about it until I noticed that she started trying to make eye contact with me. Since she walked by my window so often, I often caught her in the corner of my eye and unintentionally looked at her. Every time she got eye contact, she would start giggling/laughing uncontrollably. This went on for a week or two. I just thought she was mentally ill or something and didn't think much about it. Then one day, she walked past an insane amount of times, as in 15 to 20 times in a couple of hours, and each time she was constantly looking into my window when walking by. This is when I started getting uncomfortable. After unintentionally getting eye contact again, I quickly turned my eyes to the computer again, only to see in the corner of my eye that she had stopped, standing outside my window and looking right at me, laughing uncontrollably with her creepy smile on her face. I quickly pulled the curtains and tried to ignore it when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door, and there she was. I was home alone and starting to get some serious creeps. I was at the time babysitting my friend's poodle and picked it up to use it as some kind of protection. I said, "Hi," and she responded with a very, very happy, "Hello." She then said, "Now it's your turn." I had no idea what she wanted and only responded with, "Okay." She then started laughing a lot, as if she had just heard the best joke of her entire life. I started panicking and shut the door after quickly telling her to leave. I told my parents when they came home, and it turned out that this woman was an old student of my mother's. She said that she was mentally ill and that I shouldn't worry. Her visits outside my window continued every day, and I told my parents again that I felt uncomfortable. They then tried to talk to her to see what was up. My mom asked her why she did it, and she told her that she and I have some kind of supernatural connection in our heads, and that she and I have conversations with each other through some kind of telepathic way. We are made for each other and madly in love. That's when my parents started getting concerned. Her visits continued on a daily basis, and we visited the police to see what could be done. Their answer was that we couldn't do anything because of stupid laws in my country. She often rang my doorbell, but I had the sense not to answer. I noticed that as time went on, she got worse and worse mentally. She started to show aggressive behavior toward my parents when they asked her to leave. I have actually never seen my dad so uncomfortable and overprotective as he was at this time. He was worried as well. One day, something happened that was enough for me. It was Friday night, and I was home alone. I was watching TV and heard strange noises from the street. I peeked out the window, and there she was, outside my window, dancing, screaming, singing, and doing all kinds of strange things. I turned off all the lights in my house and pretended not to be home, but I could still hear her. She was still outside. My neighbors ended up calling me several times, asking if I was okay, and I said I was, but I wasn't. I was scared. My parents were hours from coming home, and all I did was watch TV, pretending not to be home. She stayed for an hour or two before leaving, and the week after, my parents and I decided to take action. We visited different mental hospitals in my county and tried to tell them what happened. But there was one problem. They didn't have her as a patient and couldn't help us. Neither could the police. To make the rest of the story short, this continued for the entire summer, and towards the end, she would often spy on our house, playing some sick game with a child she had started hanging out with. At this point, she was scared of us because she knew we had contacted the police and different doctors, and they were shouting things such as, "You see that house? Watch out for them, or they will call the police." She and the child would run and come back minutes later, repeating the same thing. The police visited our block several times, hunting her when she was clearly out of control. There are so many incidents I can tell you about this story, but it would take way too long to tell everything. I don't live at home anymore, and I haven't been bothered by her since, except for the time she tried to contact me on Facebook, but I instantly blocked her. I'm a 22-year-old college senior about to graduate and start medical school in the fall. This happened when I was in elementary school, so over a decade ago. Over the summer way back then, my mom sent me to YMCA summer camp. I enjoyed going in every day and hanging out with all my friends from school who also went to the camp, but I especially loved one of the counselors, Mike. Mike was always sitting in the same spot when I got dropped off in the morning, and he would see me walk in and put a huge smile on his face. We would always sit there and play cards or some other board game in the morning while all the kids were arriving. Once the day's scheduled activities started, Mike would always be the counselor in charge of my group. He would always be just close to me. As a kid, I didn't know that was weird. I really liked him, as I said, as I thought he was a really cool guy as an 8-year-old. Fast forward a couple years. My mom, my younger sister, and I were out at a state park in the area, about half an hour from where we lived. We had just gone down there to hang out for the day. We have a great time on the playground, walking around the trails, etc., and then we head back to the car. When we arrive back at the car, my mom was getting my sister all strapped in and ready for the ride home, and I was getting situated in the back seat as well. Now our car was in the parking lot, obviously, and there really weren't tons of people at the park that day. The lot was pretty much empty, so when I noticed that there was a car parked right next to our car, I was like, that's weird. But again, I was a kid and didn't really think anything of it. Why would this car park literally right next to us when I can see 50 empty spots from right here? Anyways, my mom is getting my sister and I all ready for the trip back home, as I said. Suddenly, the driver door of the other car opens, and out pops Mike. My mom recognized him, so she just said hi, and continued back to what she was doing. Mike says, "Do you mind if I take a couple pictures of I am a grocery bag? He's gotten so grown, and I want to remember this." My mom obviously goes, "No, you're not going to do that," and shuts the driver's door and locks the car, and we leave. As we're leaving, I can see Mike trying to take a photo through the windows of the car. A couple years later, when I was a bit older, my mom told me more details about Mike. My mom at the time was pretty high up in a company that pairs kids with adult mentors. Adults would apply to be paired with a kid. So my mom starts telling me about how one day they were going through the applications to be a mentor, and Mike's name popped up. Apparently someone else had interviewed Mike and recommended him for approval into the system. My mom, on the other hand, essentially vetoed it because she obviously had known Mike from these other experiences, and she got a weird vibe from him that something was off with him. So finally, we're watching the news at dinner one day a bit later. They start sharing a story about a man who was arrested, and they show the mugshot of the man, Mike. The charge? Thousands of images and videos of child porn that he both had made and was just in possession of. He actually was caught by Border Patrol, as he was acting weird when he was trying to cross into Canada, and they decided to search his car, and they found a bunch of it on his computer. They alerted US authorities, who then searched his house, and they found a ton more of it. I am 100% confident that he wanted to add me to the collection. If not for my mom having a great mother's instinct and the border, it might have happened. This experience happened to me when I was 14 years old. I haven't spoken to anyone about the event since it happened, not even my significant other. I'm 20 years old now, about to double major with my first 2 degrees in psychology and anthropology. Recently, for reasons unknown to me, the memories of this strange happening have resurfaced and continue to plague my waking thoughts, as well as my unconscious and subconscious. As we are taught in psychology, talking about the situation could help with repressed trauma. So here it goes. I live in the high desert mountains of Southern California, situated just below the Sierra Nevada, about 30 minutes west of Mojave. My town is no booming metropolis. At the time, our largest market was a Kmart, one of the last still in business, I might add, and we only had 4 stoplights in town. This takes place in a subsection of the town about 13 miles from the shops, banks, and restaurants, in a small community largely inhabited by retirees. It was smack dab in the middle of summer, and the temperatures were well in the high 90s. My nightly routine consisted of walking my Australian Shepherd. However, I would wait until it was almost dark to avoid the heat. I grabbed my phone, a small pocket knife, some headphones, my pup, and set out for my nightly walk. My community is also home to a significant number of equestrian riders as well as cattle ranchers. The trails I walked were designated horse riding trails set between pastures. That night, I decided to take the horse trail that stretches for approximately 2 miles between back-to-back paddocks. It's basically a long, narrow trail between very large backyards. My ending destination was the Equestrian Center, a communal equestrian park where all types of horse riders could enjoy various activities on their horses. Making my way through the sandy terrain of the trail, it was nearly dark now. The sky was becoming a deeper shade of blue every time I looked up, and my dog was becoming harder to see. I estimated my arrival at the Equestrian Center to be around 15 minutes from my current position, so I sent a text to my mother. "I'll be at the Equestrian Center in about 15 minutes. Could you meet me there? I'm too tired to walk back." My mother replied, "Sure, I'll leave in 10 minutes. At this point, I was just outside the east entrance of the Equestrian Center, where the Enchanted Forest Trail connects to the straight trail I was on, sort of like a 3-way intersection. You can either go left into the Enchanted Forest Trail or go straight into the Equestrian Center. Before I reached the intersection of the trails, I noticed a shift in my dog's behavior as she became anxious and seemingly worried. She had her eyes fixated on the forest and stopped dead in her tracks. I played it off as another animal within the forest, like a bobcat or boar, as they weren't uncommon in my area. I gave her a slight tug on her collar, although she was still incessantly focused on the forest. With a little more convincing, I was able to get her moving forward, pushing on towards the Equestrian Center, where my mother would be waiting for our arrival. It was nearly pitch black now, with only the moon guiding me with its low light. There was just the slightest visibility, forcing me to turn on my cell phone's dim flashlight. Entering the Equestrian Center, I noticed something that startled me immensely. A very tall person, a man, stood about 10 to 15 feet into the Enchanted Forest Trail with his back towards me, standing completely still, his head facing the sky and his hands open, palms pointing in front of him while his arms were at his side. He was tall, approximately 6 feet, with a slim build, short dark hair, and wearing what looked to be light blue scrubs, or at least a very thin blue napkin-like material, and he was barefoot. What startled me the most was his demeanor and what he was doing. His stance was enough to scare anyone in that setting, but as I approached him slowly, it appeared to me he was shaking, vibrating, or slightly convulsing, but doing so while standing up. It didn't seem like he had any control over it, although he maintained his balance perfectly. Scared and not entirely sure what to do, I asked him, "Hello, excuse me?" I paused momentarily and raised my voice slightly with the next question. "Is everything all right?" When I said that, he stopped shaking altogether, but still didn't turn around or move another muscle. He just remained in that same creepy position and didn't move. For a brief moment, I thought I might have been imagining this. I glanced down at my dog, and she was also concerned with the state and condition of this man, and began growling quietly. Then I knew it wasn't all in my head. When I looked back up, he had moved closer to me, about 7 feet closer, now almost on my trail's path. I had only looked at my dog for a split second, and he did it without making a sound. He still wasn't facing me either, and his hands were still open, head still facing the sky. I wasn't about to wait and see what this guy was doing or what his intentions were, so I slowly eased my way past him towards the equestrian center, as quietly as I could before I felt that I was at a safe enough distance to start sprinting as fast as I could away from this guy. When I reached the first arena of the equestrian center, I looked back in the direction of the forest, completely out of breath. And there he was. The man was standing on the edge of the trail outside of the forest, facing me. I was too far away to see his face, and frankly, I didn't want to. I couldn't make out his features. All I could see was his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight peeking through the forest's trail. I continued to run with no intention of stopping until I found someone. I had never been so happy to see my nagging neighbor Penny and her moody mare Jolene riding in the Milano area. She noticed my distress, but due to her already harsh opinions of me, I told her I had been on an endurance run and was just very out of breath and tired. I wanted to avoid any small-town gossip as much as I could. My mother arrived with impeccable timing. During the ride home, I broke down in a state of paranoia, distress, and panic at what I had just witnessed. My mother didn't know exactly what to make of it, so she recommended I file a police report with the local PD. About an hour after getting home, an officer showed up to take my statement. Following up the next day, the same officer claimed to have gone and checked out the area, but didn't find anyone or anything out of the blue, apart from partial bare footprints. However, there's nothing incriminating or suspicious about someone going for a walk without shoes. He played it off as a joke and accused me of being under the influence, but I can assure you, I was completely sober. Nothing ever came out of this. I attended weekly therapy sessions for almost 2 years following this event and never went on walks by myself again. I had night terrors about the man and still do. I still don't know what to make of it. I don't know if I ever will. A few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in North Georgia. As many of you might know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state and predominantly Christian. There are small Jewish communities and a few summer camps. I'd say this camp was more culturally Jewish than religious. There were no religious requirements or religion-specific focus. Rather, it was a place for kids who were often in the minority to meet other kids like them. Staff came from all over. We had many Australians, lots of Brits, a few Israelis, and people from various areas of the USA. Each night at around 10, most of the staff could go out on the town for a couple of hours. Enough staff remained behind to watch over the cabins. We rotated. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar to grab a few beers. It had been a hot day and was a humid night, so we decided to sit outside on the patio. For some backstory on the town, generally, we were extremely well received by the community despite our differences. We brought in lots of revenue for the town during the summer. We bought supplies at the local Walmart and often took the campers on tubing trips, or occasionally out to dinner after a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we'd been out to the bars in the area many times already that session. The 5 of us sat around a table, drinking and discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees typically would after work. About 30 minutes in, a white man in his 20s came up to our table. I distinctly remember a jagged scar on his cheek, but didn't think much of it at the time. He introduced himself, and then told us that he was having a party that night at his place. "Anyone can come," he said. Black, white, gay, straight. I found it odd that he'd open his speech with that disclaimer. Of course, the party should be open to everyone. Why did he feel the need to specify? But we'd all had a few beers and were feeling pretty loose. He talked for a bit longer, and nothing really seemed off. We told him we were working at a camp in the area and couldn't stay out, so we'd probably be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went out to the parking lot to get into the car. As we approached it, we saw the same guy come out of the shadows. He had a buddy with him with a shaved head. His expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed. He pounded his fist into his hand, then took off his shirt and revealed a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in my group, Kevin, immediately reacted by pulling a knife out of his back pocket. At summer camp, most of us staff carried knives. We spent a lot of time building campfires, etc. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks and told us he was going to beat us down. Kevin started walking toward the two guys, but we pulled him back. He told us his buddies were on the way. Sure enough, some more guys started walking into the parking lot. It's all kind of blurry here. I remember jumping into one of the cars, pulling Kevin with us. It felt like we were surrounded, though there were probably only 7 or 8 of them. Rocks were thrown at the car. We sped off. My heart was beating like crazy. We never went back to that bar. On the bright side, when we told the story to the competing bar in town, the bartender lined up 6 shots, cheered us, and said we'd always be welcome in his bar in that town.